Ethiopians, and they swam the river, much to our amazement, because the river was heaving with crocodiles. And they got bales of wood, which they called jundis, called bamboo and things. They just hung on to it, and they sort of swam across the river. Crocodiles didn't seem to take any notice of them. And when they came out of the river, and they looked at us in amazement, and of course we couldn't really speak to them, and we noticed they were wearing absolutely nothing except the silver Coptic cross, because they were a sort of early form of Christianity there. And so we offered them a Mars bar. We had got a lot of Mars bars. They were the standard issue in the kit in those days, in the rations. And they were quite friendly. And then I noticed that what they were certainly looking at was our guns. And they were quite clear. They were a recce party. And they were sort of counting how many of us there were and how many guns we had. And eventually they swam home, and we thought, well, I don't know whether these chaps are up to no good. So we then decided to have our supper, and it was Sunday night, and we'd had a bit of an escape earlier in the day, which was when we were very lucky when we were actually fired on, and we'd had to fire back at some of the opposition. But it was Sunday night, and we decided to have a service, which we did, and we sang "Now Thank We All Our God" from the Army hymn book, which we really meant. I think we were quite frightened by this time, having been a prisoner, having to fight our way out at one point. And while we were singing and so on, it looked very peaceful, nothing was going to happen, and we got into bed. But we said, right, tonight we'll have double sentries on. So the first sentry was a fellow called Roger Chapman, who was a Green Howard, and the second one was David Bromhead, who got this top prize in the combat pistol range. And David was inside the zareba, and all of us had gone to bed. Everyone was sleeping with their clothes on, and just keeping an ear open for anything. And Roger decided that he would go down to the boats, which were moored on the side of the island, and have a look to see all was well. And as he went down to the boats, he heard a crunch on the shingle, and in the darkness he could see some movement. He suddenly realized that some of these chaps that we'd seen earlier in the day had come back, and it was now pitch dark. So he said, "Good evening, would you like a Mars bar?" or something like that. Whereupon there was a howling scream, and then they set upon him. And they were carrying what appeared to me in the darkness to be long swords. And Roger, luckily, was extremely fit, and he ran like a stag up the beach, shouting, stand to," with these chaps coming after him, trying to cut his head off. I was asleep at the time, and I can remember sort of having this dream in which someone was shouting, stand to, stand to." Well, we'd fought this little battle earlier in the day, and I suppose I was saying to myself, it's just a dream, I'm just dreaming about what happened, pay no attention, go back to sleep. Well, I'm sure you've had this feeling, and it does take about, I suppose, several seconds before you realize that it's not a dream, it's reality. And I rolled out of bed and grabbed the one thing I did remember, which was in my top pocket. I had a mini flare discharger, which was all like a ballpoint pen with a little flare on top of it, and you pointed this in the sky and fired it, and up went a very light. And this lit up the whole area of the beach. And one of my colleagues had fired another one, and I could see Roger running towards the camp with his chap waving his sword behind him. And this was a very big man. I can remember him now. He must have been twice the size of Roger. And when poor Roger got to the zareba, because he couldn't get over it. He couldn't find the sort of gateway we'd left, and there he was struggling to get over this thorn fence. And David Bromhead came up just in time as this fellow was about to lob Roger's head off. And with this 45 Smith & Wesson, shot the chap. And it was quite interesting because the man was actually running at full tilt at the time, and he must have weighed 15 stone, I would have thought, and he stopped absolutely dead. And I won't ruin your breakfast by telling you what he looked like, but he had got a hole about the size of that, one of those plates in the back, and that was a lead bullet. And it was very lucky because he would have killed Roger the next second. And well, at that point, we then said, what are we going to do? Here we are on this little island. There are 10 of us. We've got a limited amount of ammunition. We've all got revolvers. We had one 9mm hunting rifle. We had a .22 rifle. And we had, most importantly, we had a semi-automatic Browning shotgun, 12-bore shotgun. And we quickly deployed around the zareba. And then we realized, of course, there were a lot more enemy than we'd actually seen in the first case. And there were not only the ones who'd come up the beach towards us, but there were about a dozen or so on the island, on the land, opposite the island. And they appeared to be armed with something like muzzle-loading muskets, because you could see a huge flash and a bang when they opened fire, and something like a 6-inch nail whistled overhead. And we began to sort of exchange a fire with these people in the dark, well, because you couldn't see very much. So we started firing our mini flares to land behind them in the grass and tried to set the grass on fire so we could sort of silhouette them and shoot back. They were very courageous people, because they didn't know really, I suppose, how effective our weapons would be. And at close range they were all right, but at long distance we couldn't do very much. But at this point there was a charge, and one of our officers, who was an Australian, had got this pump gun, which he produced, and he had 4 rounds of SG. Well, there are 11 balls in each cartridge, and you fire 4, boom, 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 and it's sort of like a machine gun, and that actually stopped the charge quite effectively. But again, we hadn't gone there to start a war. We'd gone there for defense against angry crocodiles, not against people. And after a time, we were beginning to run out of ammunition. And so we decided to withdraw down the beach to where our boats were and prepare to leave if we had to in the dark. But I realized that our aerial was up in the tree, and it was a very important part of our radio kit, and we had to get it down. So I turned to the naval officer who was with me, who was a midshipman, and I said, "Joe, would you mind climbing up the tree and getting down the radio aerial?" And I must say, without complaint, he did. I mean, he was being shot at all the time with these 6-inch nails from these chaps with muskets. And he untangled the aerial, which was some difficulty in the dark, climbed down, got the radio, put it into a rubber boat which was on our other side of the island, and he rowed down between the 2 firing lines. The spirit of Nelson is not dead. And he got away with it. And then we regrouped around our boats, and I counted the ammunition, and most people were down to 3 or 4 rounds each, which isn't very many. And there were very determined bandits who were coming after us. And we saw them attack the camp just after we'd moved out, and smashing the tents and so on, but because we weren't there, we were by this time at the end of the island. And I'd gone round to the various members of the team and said, "Right, your arc of fire is from that tree to that bush, or that boulder to that tree, whatever," and make sure that everyone was absolutely ready, and they fire only when they're right on top of you. And one of our members was a lecturer from Sandhurst, Richard Snellam, who some of you may know. Anyway, Richard was there as well, and so I crawled over to Richard. He's not an academic gentleman. I said, "Richard, now your arc of fire is from here to there." He said, "There is a small point I feel I should raise at this juncture." And I said, "Well, for God's sake, man, what is it?" He said, "I don't have a gun." And he was touching his Swiss penknife. So I took my pith helmet off, and I said, "Well, in that case, guard this." And put it on, and he put his ground shield over this white helmet, which was not a good thing to wear at night. It was a perfect target. And we then waited for the next charge, which sure enough came. We fired one more sort of volley, and then leapt into our boats and set off in the dark, and went down the river, which I wouldn't recommend doing in the night, into the rapids. And it was a rather interesting experience, because you could feel yourself rising and falling in the waves. You couldn't hear anything because of the noise of the water and such. And my boat, which had a small engine on it, was pulling one of the others. And suddenly this boat started to drag rather a lot, and we realized the problem was actually we were sinking, and we seemed to have taken a bullet through the bow. I don't think it was a bullet, I think it was a leaking valve, but anyway, our bow was deflating, and so we had to cast off the boat behind, and as we did so it turned over, and all the men and everything went in the water. Nothing we could do, and the helmsman, who was the naval officer, said, "Hold on tight, I'm going astern." And he reversed the outboard, and this sort of Zodiac went into reverse. And the next thing was we crashed into a sandbank, which you couldn't see in the dark. And I shot out and landed on my backside on the beach, beside something that was rather long and scaly that slithered into the river. And I realised I'd almost just fallen on top of a crocodile. He was probably more surprised than I was. And we lay there watching our camp burn in the distance, and everyone kept very quiet. And by using torches, flashing up and down the river with sort of Morse code, which in those days people used to do, we managed to make contact with the other members of the team who were by now scattered at various points down the river, including the chaps who'd been in the boat that had turned over. They'd all hung onto the boat, gone through the rapid and got out. And so we really thought, well, that's it. We've got to get out of here before dawn, because we're going to be picked off by these chaps with rifles if we stay. And by saying that, we had almost no ammunition left for our own guns. And so just before dawn, we decided to move. And we started going downriver. We picked up all the various boats. We'd lost one in the night that had disappeared downriver, but we didn't worry about that. We got all the people. And I got on the radio as soon as I could, and by some miracle of communication, we managed to get through to our base camp over a 13,000-foot mountain. It's one of these things that rarely happens. And the first thing I said to them was, we've been attacked twice now, but do not tell the authorities, because I know what will happen. Haile Selassie will send his fighter jets in with napalm, and they'll start napalming everyone down the river, and we're in the middle of it. So, for God's sake, just keep quiet for the time being. And while I was talking, I saw the naval officer's face, and he said, "Oh my God!" And we looked up, and there was a bank with a regiment of crocodiles all sitting sort of lined up one beside the other. And they took one look at us, and they actually galloped down the bank towards us and came into the water like torpedoes. And it was really quite interesting, the speed at which they could move straight at you. Well, luckily, one of our members was the crocodile expert of Africa. It was a young doctor of zoology. And I, by this time, had grabbed the 9mm rifle, which was a proper hunting rifle, thinking, well, I may as well sell myself dearly. And I was starting to take aim, and he shouted out, "Don't shoot, they're only curious." For God's sake, I thought, I hope you're right. And sure enough, he was absolutely right. They came alongside the boat. We could feel them scraping under the boats. And one of them, an enormous beast, was longer than the boat. I always remember this thing swimming alongside us with this sort of great corrugated back cutting through the water. And the Australian officer, who also was a geologist, had enough of it then, so he picked up a sandbag that we had with all our geological specimens, which were rather precious, and he swung it on his head and he hit this crocodile over the head. It had absolutely no effect at all. The crocodile didn't even notice it. And the bag burst and we lost all the geological specimens, so it really wasn't the best thing to do. But we came around the next bend in the river, and I saw the face of the helmsman again and said, "Oh my God, look at this lot!" And the whole of the river was full of hippos. Well, before we left England, we had been told by the people at the British Museum, Natural History Museum, that we should be very careful about crocodiles, but more importantly, be very careful about hippos. And he said, whatever you do, do not go near them in the mating season. We said, well, when's that? He said, well, it's an interesting zoological question. Maybe if you come back, you'll be able to give some light on it. And there were all these hippos all sitting. And we thought, golly, one of these male hippos will see a black rubber boat, and they might get the idea that it's his girlfriend. But they didn't make too many aggressives, and we managed to slip by them. And then, to our sheer relief, we came round the bend, and we saw an assault boat that was coming up the river. And this is